Hello everybody, it's Jesse again with another episode of Bring On the Bad Guys. Today we're taking a look at some of Captain America's most nefarious foes. We are looking at his enemies that debuted against him in mainly the 1960s, but also his earlier books in the 40s. And the 50s didn't really hold so much for Captain America as far as lasting villains, so we have some from the 40s, some from the 1960s, and we're going to stop right at December of 1969, and of course let the 70s villains have their own segment later on. We've covered the Hulk so far, we've covered the Fantastic Four and Namor the Submariner, so here is Captain America, and we're going to jump right into it. And villain number one is going to be a surprise for you, perhaps, as we jump in. His name is George Maxim, and you might look at that picture and say, isn't that the Red Skull? And it is. It's not the real Red Skull, though. So George Maxim was an American in the 1940s, 1941 to be exact. He first appeared in Captain America Comics #1, which was also the first appearance of Captain America. And he was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Now, a quick review of the power scale. We rank everyone in 5 categories, 5 points in each category: personality, powers, design. Those are all self-explanatory. If this is your first time with us, mythology is everything that takes place in the pages of comics. Cultural impact is everything that takes place outside of comics. So George Maxim, first Red Skull to appear. He was an American who posed as the Red Skull and fought against Bucky and Captain America in their early days. He would later die, as was often the case with many 1940s Marvel villains, and actually stay dead. He would pop up just in flashbacks, generally here and there. But he was the first Red Skull that Bucky and Captain America fought against, not the real one, which is why he's all the way down at number 10. So George Maxim definitely operated differently from the standard Red Skull. He used little tricks that he called like his touch of death. That was an example of a trick that he used to kill people. And he used basically a hypodermic needle or electric jolt that was hidden or rigged up to his gloves or hands. That's how he would murder people, and he would make those who witnessed the crimes believe that he had just touched them and they died. Some people also say that Ed Herron had a hand in the creation of George Maxim. I didn't have him listed. If he did have that connection, I do apologize for that. Power scale, personality, we don't get to see too much about George, but we know he has Nazi sympathetic mentalities. Powers 1, like I said, normal human being, not enhanced in any way. Mythology, he only lasts a couple issues, so he doesn't have a very lasting story, except obviously he paves the way for the real Red Skull. Design, his Red Skull, I think, at least at the start, looked a little scarier than the second Red Skull. Cultural impact 3, just because he was the first Red Skull, and that was set up for the legendary original, actual, real Red Skull. Moving to number 9, we have another 1940s foe who, again, hasn't appeared in too many comics aside from flashbacks. We have Heinz Kruger. And Heinz Kruger may be one of the most influential people on this list aside from the Red Skull. Heinz Kruger is the Nazi spy that infiltrated Project Rebirth and was in attendance at the experiment that turned Steve Rogers into Captain America. So his first appearance was, again, in Captain America Comics #1 in March of 1941. He's from Germany and was created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. As a Nazi spy, he was obviously highly trained in the use of firearms. And we don't know a lot about Mr. Kruger, aside from he was the one that shot Abraham Erskine right after the success of Captain America's Vita Ray experiment. And that action by Heinz Kruger has paved the way for so many storylines, in that, if you know the Captain America storyline, the super soldier serum, which made Steve Rogers into Captain America, has been tried to be, the attempts to replicate the serum have been numerous over the decades, and no one's quite been able to do it the same way that Abraham Erskine was able to. So Kruger assassinated Dr. Erskine, and it's actually set up pretty accurate to the comics in the movie Captain America: The First Avenger, where Kruger is portrayed by Richard Armitage. He assassinates the Doctor, runs away. In the comics, there's not really a chase, but Captain America hunts him down, catches him, and he takes a cyanide pill in the movie. So Heinz Kruger, definitely very influential, which is why his cultural impact and mythology scores are higher. Mythology at 4 and cultural impact at 3. His design, a typical Nazi, well-dressed, dapper, I should say typical spy, not typical Nazi. Powers and personality both 1. We don't really get to know him that well, and his powers, of course, are not anything, just a standard everyday human. Moving to number 8, we have the Exiles, and this is not the most famous Marvel Exiles team. That would be the X-Men spin-off. And this team was compromised. This team was composed of various military leaders from World War II that had escaped justice from the Allies and were recruited by the Red Skull and formed a band of supervillains to serve alongside the Red Skull. Their first appearance was in Captain America 102 in June of 1968. They were created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Robert Bernstein. They had different abilities. As you can see, they all are, very informed in the ways of war. Not very many have exceptional abilities. The team roster, as you can see here, Eric Grunig, Angelo Baldini, Ivan Krushki, Franz Kadavus, Iron Hand Hauptmann, and General Jun Ching. And Iron Hand Hauptmann is the only, I would say, enhanced individual here. You can see in the picture that he has a bionic hand. And Franz Kadavus has what he calls his murder chair. He's confined to a wheelchair of sorts that he has weaponized. So he has some blasters and guns attached to his chair, and that's how he threatens others while remaining mostly crippled. The Red Skull stumbled upon them and invited them all to Exile Island, and that is where he began trying to transform them into a group of villains that could take down Captain America. Of course, he failed, and the Exiles have only been around sparingly since. The Red Skull's daughter, going by the codename of Sin, actually was responsible for most of their deaths, and that occurred decades later. Personality 3, which is kind of the average. Some of them are more charismatic than others. Powers 2, again, most of them are just standard military people. Mythology 3, they did have a very interesting storyline when they debuted in the late 60s. Design, nothing to speak of, although Hauptmann's Iron Hand is kind of fun, as is the Murder Chair. And Cultural Impact 2, again, they didn't really do much off the pages of comic books. So that's the Exiles. Moving to number 7, we have the Super Adaptoid. And the Super Adaptoid obviously doesn't have a real name because he is an android. He first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 82 in October of 1966. And he was created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Gene Colan. His personality is 1 because, again, it's artificial. He's an artificial being, so his personality is the result of programming. And his powers are 4 in that he basically can copy the powers of people that he comes across, which is why you see in this picture he looks a little like Iron Man. He has Captain America's stripes. He has a head that looks mostly like the Vision and Iron Man kind of mashed in together. And you don't see it in the picture, but he also has tried to mimic Thor by having a fake Mjolnir hammer. So he was a creation of AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics. We've seen them in the MCU in Iron Man 3. And the Super Adaptoid's first story, as you can see by his first quote here, "Would you care for your coffee now, sir?" is actually the first line that the Super Adaptoid says in the pages of the comics. And that's because he's posing as Jarvis the butler when Captain America arrives back at Avengers Mansion. The Super Adaptoid has already drugged Jarvis and put him in a closet where he is tied up. And the Super Adaptoid proceeds to mentally challenge Captain America by transforming into his different foes and fellow Avengers, and convinces Captain America that he is seeing things, and that's how he ends up beating him. So, unfortunately for the Super Adaptoid, he then posed as Captain America. Then a small-time crook called the Tumbler came in, which is one of my favorite clunky Marvel supervillain names. The Tumbler snuck into Avengers Mansion, thought that the Adaptoid was Captain America because that's who he looked like, and the Tumbler actually won this battle. So, yeah, the Adaptoid wasn't prepared for it, but it's not a great start to your supervillain career to be defeated by the Tumbler. However, I actually kind of compare what happened after that to John Carpenter's The Thing, or the original short story, John Campbell's Who Goes There, where you have a creature that keeps assimilating powers and characteristics. And the Avengers stuck the Super Adaptoid in Hank Pym's lab in Avengers Mansion. And while the Adaptoid was waiting there, he was able to absorb the powers of all the Avengers that were present. So he came very close to actually defeating the Avengers after losing to the Tumbler. They were able to finally figure out what was happening, the Avengers were, that is, and take down the Adaptoid. He has also gone on to fight the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and he shows up aligned with villains from time to time as well. He has appeared in 3 animated series, the 1960s Marvel superhero show Avengers Assemble, and the 90s X-Men animated show where he appears a couple times in flashbacks. If you go way back to the Sega Genesis, he's the final boss in the game Spider-Man Web of Fire, and a version of the Adaptoid is available as an unlockable playable character in LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. So that is the Super Adaptoid. Moving on to number 6, we have Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus's real name is Johann Feinhoff, or Fenhoff, if you want to pronounce it more anglicized. His first appearance was in Captain America 107 in November of 1968. He hails from Vienna, Austria, and was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He is a genius psychotherapist who enjoys manipulating people in a psychological fashion. He's very good at manipulating his voice modulation to hypnotize his clients / victims. So his personality is at a 4. He's very clever, very diabolical, very smart. Powers are 1. Again, he doesn't have any super skills to speak of. He's just very smart, very talented, and has, again, mastered the art of voice modulation. The mythology is 3, primarily because of his influence in the storyline of the death of Captain America. His design is 3. He's had some pretty sweet beards over the years. long, short, depends on who's drawing him, of course. But he always has that perfect menacing, almost Hannibal Lecter look in his eyes where he knows what you're thinking and he won't let you into his own head. Cultural Impact 3, and that is because he was the main villain in Season 1 of Agent Carter in the MCU. He's played by Ralph Brown, and if you have not gotten a chance to watch Agent Carter, it is a great show. And Dr. Faustus in Season 1 is played very well, a very, very good villain for the TV show. Dr. Faustus has also appeared in one episode of the animated show Avengers Assemble, which we mentioned with the Adaptoid previously. So that's Dr. Faustus, and he actually came into play when Captain America was seeking some counseling when he was coming back from being a capsule, as Tony Stark would say, and he was struggling with the whole aspect of being a, quote, man out of time. And he went to see Dr. Faustus, who gave him some medication that was not really medication, but stuff that messed with his head and gave him nightmares, and basically kept setting up these walls of psychological blocks and fears and trauma, and almost succeeded in breaking Captain America mentally before Cap and his friends figured out what was happening. And of course, the Doctor is no match for Captain America or anyone that is a legitimate hand-to-hand combatant. So once Cap discovered the problem, the victory was assured. Moving to number 5, we have Batroc the Leaper. Because he's French, that's why I said it like that. His first appearance was in Tales of Suspense, number 75, in 1966. His real name is Georges Batroc. He's from Marseille, France. And I'm very bad at speaking with a French accent with names, so I did probably not pronounce that as smooth as I could have. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He is a very adept kickboxer, the martial art of savate. I probably should have known how to pronounce that before I went to say that he was a master of it. Very extreme flexibility and agility, especially when you consider that he's fought Captain America quite a few times and usually is able to give him a good run for his money. His personality is 3. He definitely started out more as a French caricature with his thin mustache, which he still has. But he would speak in a overdone French accent, especially in the pages of the comics, and kind of bounce around and take himself more seriously than Captain America did. The Mythology 3, Batroc has come in and out of comics and stories throughout the years since he arrived more as a mercenary character than as a ringleader. His design is a 3. At first, it looked almost like a Hawkeye knockoff, his costume, with more exaggerated eye pieces. In Cultural Impact 3, I should say his costumes have gotten better over the years and less gaudy. Cultural Impact 3, and that is primarily due to some of his appearances. He's a boss character in Spider-Man and Captain America, in Doctor Doom's Revenge. That was a late 80s, early 90s video game. He's shown up in Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and the Marvel Superheroes animated shows. He was played by Georges St-Pierre in the MCU. Or if you really want to say it completely without a French accent, Georges Saint-Pierre. And that's one of the best fight scenes, I think, in the MCU, is when he and Captain America fight on the Lemurian Star. And it's a very fun scene, because if you're not familiar with Mr. Saint-Pierre, he is one of the best real-life martial artists in the world at this point. And so it's super fun that he was able to participate in the movie and really help with the fight choreography and have a very memorable fight when you consider that it takes place early in the movie and that the character doesn't really stick around much after the fight is over. So that is Batroc the Liber. Number 4 is Baron Zemo, and this is not the Baron Zemo that will definitely rank a little higher up later on when he shows up. This is the first Baron Zemo chronologically that we come into contact with in the comics. And this is Heinrich. He's from Germany, and he was a high official that worked with both Hitler and the Red Skull in World War II. His first appearance is in the Avengers number 6 in July 1964. Quick side note, when we're talking first appearances, in the comic collecting world, there's often this debate over what constitutes a first appearance. Is it a cameo? Is that the same thing as a first appearance later? I don't really buy into the whole, oh, this person only showed up in one panel, so that doesn't count. And he showed up in more than one in the second story that they were in, so that is his first real appearance. So the only things that I consider cameos are if you don't see the character. So, for example, Baron Zemo technically shows up in a flashback in the Avengers number 4, when the Avengers find Captain America frozen in ice after Prince Namor had freed him from his icy prison. And he's just in shadows, so you can't see him. He's literally a shadow, a black outline running away from the scene of the action. So I would consider that an appearance in shadows. I don't even know if you can call it a cameo because you don't really see the guy. In Avengers 6, that's when you actually can see Baron Zemo, so that's his first appearance. Just to contrast that with something like Wolverine, where a lot of people say, well, Incredible Hulk 180 is a cameo because he's only in one panel, and 181 is his first full appearance. I don't really buy into that. He's there in 180. He's a significant part of the story. You see him in 180. It's not like he's in the shadow and you can't tell who he is. He's got his costume. He's got his claws. It's Wolverine. He's there. So what if it's in one panel? So that's how I approach things. You're definitely free to have your own take on that, of course, but for the purposes of this series, that's how we're going to approach things. So his first appearance, Avengers number 6. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, of course. And his personality is a 3. His powers are a 2. Doesn't have superpowers to speak of. He's an expert swordsman, as are most people in his family. And he is a very smart, scientific inventor. So he invented a lot of advanced weaponry for the Nazis and the Red Skull in World War II. Mythology 3. He doesn't have quite the resume of his son, Helmut Zemo, who we will take a look at a little later on in the series. His design is a 4, and the iconic Baron Zemo mask, of course, the purplish pink kind of striped mask that you see in the picture, became stuck to his face thanks to one of his own inventions, Adhesive X. And his mask and accompanying costume have gone on to become one of the more iconic Marvel looks. Although, again, his son did do most of the making famous in that area. Cultural impact 3. Again, he's more known for being the father of Helmut, but he's also had some good stories of his own. But cultural impact, he has appeared in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Avengers Assemble. If you ever have played the Captain America Super Soldier video game, which is a super fun kind of Arkham Asylum-esque game, although not quite as good, you can discover his journals lying around the castle, and you can collect the journals and play them, and you hear Zemo read them. So that's kind of a fun nod to the character, even though he doesn't actually appear. He's also been in the 60s Marvel Superheroes animated show. And of course, the whole reason that his son took it upon himself to hunt down Captain America was because he blamed Captain America for killing his father. So there's that. Number 3, we have Viper. And of course, Viper in her early days was just known as Madam Hydra. And that, of course, is the title given to the highest ranking female operative of the Hydra organization. And she first appeared in Captain America 110. Her real name is Ophelia Sarkissian, and she's from Hungary. And she was created by Jim Steranko, who had some of the most amazing Captain America artwork that you're ever going to see in, of all time. The comics were in the late 60s and early 70s. So if you're looking for some wonderful, haunting, at times psychedelic, immersive art, take a look at those Captain America issues where Madame Hydra Viper has shown up for the first time. Her personality sits at 4. She obviously was the head of Hydra for a significant amount of time. Very charismatic leader. Her powers are 2. And not really superhuman level. She is immune to most toxins and poisons. She's an expert in many forms of hand-to-hand combat and martial arts, and quite a few weapons. And she's a very good planner. So that gets her some points for personality, but not necessarily for powers. Mythology 3, she's never really been a front-of-the-line mastermind, but she's had some really solid stories in the comics, especially, again, her first appearances and the apparent death of Captain America and his comeback, which is a very dramatic comeback. Design, very basic Hydra design. The green gloves are a nice touch. So we get a 3 for design, and cultural impact 3. And as far as where she's appeared off the comic book pages, she's actually had quite a bit to do with the X-Men as well. So she goes by Viper and appears in the Wolverine, which is not in the MCU. And in that iteration, she's a mutant. She was also the primary antagonist in the 1998 TV film Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the MCU, she is in Season 4 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And she's played by Mallory Hansen. And that's kind of an alternate reality version of her character. So not quite the same, but known as the same character. She's also appeared in the Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and X-Men Evolution animated shows. She is a playable character in Lego Marvel Superheroes and a boss villain in the Captain America Super Soldier video game we mentioned when talking about Baron Zemo. Number 2 gets us to one of the weirdest and most bizarre Marvel characters. We have MODOK, and of course, MODOK is an acronym which stands for Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing. And that's been edited somewhat through the years to fit family audiences or audiences where children might be part of them, and so it's been changed to MODOK with a C, and the C's been changed to Conquest and things like that, because apparently the word killing is not something that can be handled by children, which I think is true in some cases, obviously. His real name is George Tarleton, and he first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 94, although previously he did kind of appear in a shadow of a computer screen the issue previous, October 1967. He is from Maine, Bangor, Maine, and was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. What do you know? His personality is a 3, and some of that depends on who is writing him as a character, so he kind of alternates between being a sadist versus being entertaining and versus being more comedic, so his personality kind of bounces around a bit. His powers are at a 4, mostly due to his mental capacity. His brain is basically a living computer, and he has tremendous mental and psychic powers. pseudo-psychic powers because they're technologically based as well. And mythology is 4. He's well known for being the ugly villain and has bounced around as a comedic relief, a mastermind. He's got a lot of very interesting storylines to dig through. His design is a 2. As you can see, he's basically a giant head floating in what he calls the Doomsday Chair. And his cultural impact is a 4. Again, he just shows up in a lot of Marvel video games and TV shows. The Iron Man animated series from the 90s, Avengers Assemble, the Superhero Squad show, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ultimate Spider-Man. He's a boss character in the Marvel Ultimate Alliance video game. He's a playable character in Marvel Capcom 3, and you can also unlock him in all 3 Marvel Lego video games, Superheroes 1 and 2, and Avengers. So he's kind of a go-to villain that hasn't quite achieved, arch villain status like some of the folks on these lists. So his storyline is actually pretty tragic. He, again, worked for AIM. AIM had a lot of influence, along with Hydra, on Captain America's early career, and Nick Fury's too, for that matter. And he was selected by AIM leadership after basically serving as more of a peon, and he was a low-level technician. AIM selected him to participate rather unwillingly in some pretty awful experiments where they were trying to integrate a human brain with a computer, and that was the project, MODOK, to create a mental organism designed only for computing. So that was the original idea that AIM had. He was supposed to be a human-computer hybrid superprocessor that could handle working with a cosmic cube, which is what AIM was working on at that particular time. That was their primary subject matter that they were looking at. The experiments got out of hand, as they so often do in Marvel and sci-fi in general, and they not only deformed him, basically bloated his head, but they gave him psionic abilities and increased his intelligence. So he took over AIM, dropped the C at the end of MODOK, turned it into a K, and then became the mental organism designed only for killing. And S.H.I.E.L.D. heard about this new leader of AIM that had taken over supposedly out of nowhere, and sent Agent 13 to investigate. MODOK was able to figure out what she was up to. Captain America then went to save Agent 13, and that's how he ended up running into MODOK for the first time. So there's some opinions out there that people think that MODOK may be unkillable just because he keeps coming back time and time again after some pretty dire situations. He's a comic book character, so they almost always come back from the dead. He is very, very difficult to kill and very difficult to get the final advantage over because he is amazingly smart and a very durable brain and tons of weapons at his disposal. His Doomsday Chair has gotten quite the number of upgrades, and he's used them against Iron Man, the Avengers. Possibly we might be seeing him in the third Ant-Man movie in the MCU. Those are just rumors for now. He was supposed to have a television show, and that is kind of up in the air at this point, but we will see if that ever happens. And that leads us to number 1, which, to no one's surprise, is the Red Skull, the real Red Skull this time. And the real Red Skull is Johann Schmidt, and he shows up for the first time in Captain America Comics number 7, way back in 1941. And he shows up after, again, George Maxim, who was posing as the Red Skull, dies. He's from Germany, created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. So we've got Jack Kirby still around, but this was before Stan Lee took on a lot of the writing duties at Marvel and such. For the Red Skull's personality, he's at a 4. Again, he's a very charismatic individual, knows how to manipulate people mentally and psychologically. Very good leader, despite his warped mental state. His powers are at a 3. He doesn't have super strength, but he is a match for hand-to-hand combat with Captain America, so he is an enhanced individual, just not an off-the-charts one. Mythology 5, again, some really, even his early stories in the 40s were really diabolical and creepy, and there's always that mix of revenge and creepiness and xenophobia and all this different motivation wrapped up into one, and you just never know how he's going to strike next or what his exact plan is going to be. A lot of great stories. Old Man Logan, the Red Skull is in, and a very shocking turn to that story. And one of those shocking elements is what the Red Skull has done. His design, iconic as it is, will have to sit at a 5, and his cultural impact, a 5 as well. And as you likely know if you're watching this, he was portrayed by Hugo Weaving in Captain America the First Avenger, where he was the primary villain in the MCU. And he was portrayed actually previously to that, he was portrayed by Scott Paulen in 1990. There's a film called Captain America. No one really remembers it because it was a low-budget affair, and the Red Skull is Italian in this version. And then, of course, also Ross Marquand in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. So 2 different actors have played him in the MCU. He's also appeared in a bunch of animated shows, Marvel superheroes. He was a primary villain in one of the seasons of Spider-Man, the animated series. He showed up in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Avengers Assemble, Hulk and the Agents of Smash, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. He shows up in video games all the time. Captain America Super Soldier, obviously, Captain America and the Avengers, Lego Marvel Superheroes, in both 1 and 2, where he is a unlockable character. And, of course, his story is that he is obsessed with the Cosmic Cube, obsessed with turning science and, at some level, some mysticism into weapons for world domination. So his origin story goes that he was a bellhop and met Hitler as a young boy, and Hitler decided to teach him the ways of the Nazi Party, and the Red Skull quickly rose through Hitler's ranks, and as portrayed in Captain America the First Avenger, kind of went off in his own way, although of course his indoctrination into Nazi doctrine and such has lasted. A very fun story from the early Red Skull days, and by early I mean the 60s, when he showed up again in the main Marvel comic runs of Captain America, is his sleepers. And his sleepers were a bunch of giant robots that he had buried all over Europe, and Captain America has to hunt them down and prevent them from activating and causing some widespread destruction. So that is the Red Skull, and maybe you learned something about Johann Schmidt's Red Skull versus George Maxim's, and how that was kind of turned on its head with who appeared first versus who was the actual real Red Skull. But that is the number 1 Captain America villain, as you probably expected. So we have George Maxim at 10, Heinz Kruger, and I'm going to try to remember to get these right because I just went through them all. The Exiles at 8, Super Adaptoid at 7, Dr. Faustus at 6, Batroc at 5, Baron Zemo at 4, Madam Hydra at 3, MODOK at 2, and of course the Red Skull here at 1. So that is your top 10 villains from the early days of Captain America. Next week, I'm still kind of up in the air on whether we're going to do Spider-Man or we're going to take a step back and do some Marvel Monsters or potentially Doctor Strange. So something Steve Ditko related, probably. But thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe to Daventry Studios, Bring on the Bad Guys, and we will see you next time. See ya.